Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webcast, Pulse Perfect, 3 simple questions that will reveal your perfect pulsing survey strategy. This webcast is sponsored by Kantar TNS. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that this webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM recertification credits. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. After the webcast, you will receive an email from HR.com within 1 to 2 business days. It will include the credit information. You can also log in to your account and go to your View My Credits page, where you can see the credits you have received. If you have any questions today for our presenters or for HR.com, please type them into the Questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will follow up with you. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to our presenters from Kantar TNS.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Spade, and I will be your host for today's webinar, Pulse Perfect, presented by our own Brittany Aguilar and Paul Quant. Just some quick speaker introductions here. Paul Quant is our Director of Consulting Operations. He has a double master's in industrial organizational psychology and quantitative methods with over 15 years of extensive field experience consulting for Fortune 500 organizations as well as small and medium sized global businesses. Additionally, co-presenting with him is Dr. Brittany Aguilar. She is our senior methodology consultant. Brittany has her doctorate in business psychology and a master's in industrial organizational psychology with over 10 years of experience in both corporate and academic settings. Again, my name is Scott Spade, and I also have with us today Stanford Smith, our product consultant, who will be helping us out throughout the webinar. Again, as Kathy said, we'd encourage you to ask questions throughout the event. We may pause and answer them if it's relevant to what we're presenting. Otherwise, we'll answer all the questions that come through at the end of the event. With that, I will turn it over to Brittany.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. Well, we're glad to be here today. I'm grateful for all of you joining us, and we will go through some practical examples and some best practices for pulsing. On the agenda today specifically, we'll be talking about essential questions when you begin your pulsing journey. We're all here because we either are interested in pulsing or actively using some sort of pulsing platform. So we'll talk through, once you kind of take the leap to use pulsing, where do you land? Because we know there's a lot of options out there. We'll also talk about critical timing and logistical considerations. We'll talk about how pulsing is different from a census and what that means to you as far as all the decisions you need to make, as well as next steps. How do you use the data from pulsing? It is a different animal from census, so there's a lot of changes and creative ways we can use that data that's maybe a departure from what we're used to. And the outcomes we commit to are getting smarter about what pulsing means to you, so you create a strategy that's true to your organization and true to your approach and your needs. Discover the right way to put those into action, how it works, working within your budget, and also seeing some cutting-edge technology of what good looks like, what we've seen work, and just setting you up for success with whatever your program ends up including. So just to level set really quickly, as I said, we're all here because we have some exposure or interest to pulsing, but I want to make sure we're clear on what a pulse is and is not, and how that complements a census survey, which is that full, all-inclusive survey of all employees and all items. A pulse then is a step back from that, or maybe a side step, where you're taking a sample of one of those 2 components. You're either taking some of your items and sharing them with all of your employees, or you're just taking a sample of employees and sharing all of your items to get another check or pulse of their feedback. There's also differences in the frequency. A census is usually conducted on a normal cadence, maybe every year or every other year, whereas pulses are more fluid. They can be asked more frequently and tied to special initiatives, and we'll go into this in more detail. Ownership is also different. A census is usually a larger animal, a deeper machine, more, kind of in the veins of the organization potentially, whereas a pulse can kind of rest on the surface and be utilized at, at any level in the organization, and we'll talk about some of those solutions, but you'll see that it's a broader ownership potential for pulsing. Reporting is also flexible depending on what you've used the pulse for, whereas a census, again, is that larger standard where everyone expects to see a certain output from that. Cost follows as you'd expect, then pulsing can be lower because there is some fluidity there. You're kind of doing smaller pieces of a census, which is a larger cost as well. So overall, what you see on the left for pulsing is it's more flexible, it's a lighter endeavor, and it's continuous. Whereas on the right for census, it is rigorous and it's a richer experience, but it is point in time. It's a strong exercise to align people, but sometimes that can be cumbersome. There's things we can learn from both of these to reinforce the data that you get, how you're engaging employees, and driving a really efficient and effective measurement program. So what's the buzz on pulsing? Before pulsing became really popular and we started using this term as an HR tool as well, employees were already being tapped for their feedback almost haphazardly. Think about any time you've used maybe IT. I know for us internally, if I get on the phone with them and work through a computer issue, I immediately am given a satisfaction survey. Or anytime I go through a training, I'm receiving a survey for that. You know, different initiatives come with different follow-up measures, maybe just, you know, when would you like to hear from your supervisor? Do you want pizza parties on Fridays or Mondays? There's just all sorts of ways that employees are tapped for their input. And pulse surveys have brought that to the surface. They're increasingly popular as a way to in a more quality and a higher level of transparency, get employee voices more regularly and in a way that's more controlled and really can be funneled into greater value and greater use. So what we're looking at now is the use of traditional census surveys and then the increasing popularity of pulse surveys as a supplement to census. So we have this point in time measure that 90% of organizations are using, but we're also seeing that they're beginning to increase their use of, you know, let's formalize, let's really capture the more frequent experience of the employee. So the message here basically is that whether HR likes it or not, pulse surveys have been going on all the time and will continue to go on. So it's up to us to really take advantage of the next step in understanding our employees' experience. So why pulse? There's a few camps, I'll go over them now, but a few kind of types of users and areas of interest for why you would go into a pulsing platform and use that as part of your program. Lots of P's there, but we'll keep up. Essentially, for HRBPs, it's about standardization and greater ability to understand the data. You're getting more control through the instruments and approved questions. You know, you're really bringing an infrastructure to how employees are giving regular feedback. And you also get a wider breadth of data. You can ask about more things more frequently. So it's kind of like having, you know, a person, a spokesperson in each place of the organization to kind of tap when you have a question. Think about it as maybe a more representative, I'm thinking about politics now, trying not to speak to it too often or too much, but really kind of having a room full of people you can just ask, you know, how are your constituents feeling? What's the tone of the day? What needs to be done? So you can address things more quickly. For users, the pulsing platform is kind of a breath of fresh air, right? It's faster, it's easier, it's less expensive. It has the ability also to be more inclusive. You can invite more people to give feedback more often. Maybe you're a new hire. You may not have to wait until the next full survey cycle to feel like you're a part of the employee voice that's being heard by leadership. You may also be able to include more people in the survey process itself because it is less cumbersome and more open. It's not as disengaging to go through it. Those of us who've worked on engagement survey program from the project perspective may giggle and say, you know, this is the least engaging thing that I do, just as part of the job. So it's kind of ironic there. But what brings everyone together is this pulsing to avoid pain. You know, we're always looking for ways to be better stewards of our programs and to increase the talent pipeline and our strategy there, and pulsing has really become a tool for enabling that. It's a great new, you know, kind of ray gun in our toolkit or in our armor. So, for example, when you think of the total cost of administering a census survey, you know, we've looked at the numbers. Me personally, I've worked internally with Fortune 100 companies running their engagement survey from the inside and managing those stakeholders. And now I've shifted, as we know with TNS, to the vendor side and helping those counterparts of mine run it for their organizations as well. And I know it goes into it from a communications perspective, you know, just giving of your time for employees to take the survey, for supporters to go through and kind of be champions for the survey, and then action planning. You know, it takes up a lot of resources. And when you get into the higher levels as well, that's a lot of dollars per minute being spent on the program. So it can go upwards of 100 times the cost of the survey alone, 100 times just the check you write to the vendor. So pulsing really helps you maximize that investment and even get more out of it. I'm going to pause for a moment. I see from the chat that I'm getting a question on what an SOE means. I had that in an earlier slide, and I apologize I didn't see it before. SOE is a typo. It should be COE, so Center of Excellence. That could be organizational effectiveness, you know, org development, leadership development, you name it. It's those kind of SWAT team groups within HR who maybe are running the engagement program, running development programs, and are really invested in the driver's seat of an engagement program or employee measurement. It could also be workforce insights or business analytics, anything in that area. So I apologize for skipping over that. Thank you for your question. The next section of our presentation here you'll see on the bottom end of the screen is, you know, how we're going to address and leverage pulse surveys, methodology, the flexibility of the platform to start cutting some of these costs, start addressing some of these pain points in our talent platforms so that you can be greater advocates for your organizations and for the employees themselves. You know, they want to see that their input is going somewhere. They want to see the outcomes of that, and it's going to be much easier to do that once you start including pulsing and kind of mood checking, monitoring, bringing the data together, all of that we'll talk about into your strategy. So we'll start with some of our questions introduced in the agenda. First, we're going to talk about essential elements that you need to understand prior to planning your survey. So some of you have already started incorporating pulsing, others are considering doing it for the first time. Wherever you're standing, you need to be able to answer, you know, what data do you need to find that will drive your business outcomes and your people strategy? So, you know, why are we doing this? What is the impetus, or what is the force for why we're asking for employees' feedback? What are we willing to do? You know, there's that old best practice, don't ask a question you're not willing to take action on. So really understand why you're going to go to employees and ask for their feedback, and then what you're going to do with it, and what's the best way to address it. So once you start using pulsing to do this, you can expect greater flexibility, meaning that you can be more strategic. You can decide what you need to hear from whom and when. So what's the timing, you know, what is kind of contingent on getting this information, and identify what timely information will make a difference for your business. Continuous listening and targeted pulsing are also closer to conversation than a survey. So it can feel more like a discussion. There's more give and take. It demonstrates empathy. It demonstrates a willingness to build a trusting relationship with employees when it's done well. So just imagine what you'd ask, again, if you were in a room and it was just you and the employee talking about a specific point. And that's really another difference from the census, where it's this broad conversation, you know, kind of a job interview, versus just, you know, how do you feel about this piece of your experience today? And then again, aligning that with your talent management strategy. So anywhere you're spending money, you should be measuring. Anywhere where lots of dollars are being allocated, you want to make sure that you have the data to back up that that's the right investment. So one of the biggest drains on any talent strategy or pipeline is turnover, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Exactly. We're all familiar with the high cost of lost productivity and the cost to replace employees who've left, and we also know that employees may be choosing to leave due to other issues in the organization that will continue to jeopardize or chip away at the remaining talent. So you want to make sure that you're meeting employees where they are and understanding why they're leaving. And the Pulse platform and a pulsing strategy can be really great and useful when applied to exit surveys. And this is when I'll hand over to Paul to really talk through what good looks like and how this can be used in a turnover application.
Great, thank you, Brittany. As Brittany said, exit surveys are kind of custom built for the pulsing process as far as being a good example of where you would use a pulse survey. The challenge with exit surveys that we see with a lot of companies is that the data is collected manually, and if it's collected manually and not in a pulsing environment, the data tends to sit in HR, not really shared with others, and you don't have the flexibility with the data that you would have if you're using a pulsing system in order to collect some of that data. So it helps you to organize and share some of that data, get other people plugged into the ability to see that exit data. And what we're going to take a look at is kind of what good looks like for what getting an exit survey up and running might look like for you. So the first thing is really looking at your survey itself for a pulse. And it's important to have quality items and consistent items and a good pulsing system. And we're going to just set up a quick survey here while we're talking. The quality of the items needs to be consistent so that you're collecting good quality data. But the system also has to have some flexibility in how you select the items, because different parts of the company may need different types of items in their exit surveys, and having a good pulsing tool that gives you that flexibility can go a long way. So in our example here, we have a pretty broad array of items that we can choose from that are all exit related. We'll go ahead and select them all for the moment. And go ahead and create that survey, including some demographic information to flesh out the data a little bit further so that you can dig deeper later. Including an open-ended question here. And essentially, it's all about timing for the exit surveys as well. In a manual process, you don't have the flexibility that you do in a pulsing tool. In a good tool, you have the ability to send out invitations at will. Ideally, and we'll talk about a few best practices here in a moment about timing around that, but it's nice to be able to jump right in when somebody is ready to leave, add in who you're sending the pulse survey to, send it off, and the survey is on its way. So again, this lends itself as a great example of when you would want to pulse and be able to jump into a quality tool and send off an invitation to people that you see here on the screen so that they can jump right in and give you their feedback. And really that's the power of the pulse and being able to get that invitation out the door quickly for exit surveys and get your data back far more quickly as well. Brittany, anything to add?
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate showing us, again, what good looks like, how this can really be put into practice, especially for an exit survey. I think you touched on a lot of the best practices that were included there. I want to share a few more, and we'll make this available as well. You know, you hit on survey timing. It's really important to get them where they are, especially, you know, close to the last day. Sometimes there's job abandonment. You may want to reach out a few days after departure, but the idea is to get feedback as soon as possible while the memories are fresh, while they can give specific examples. So you may even want to send reminders, and getting out certainly that initial invitation right away is important. You also talked about item selection. We showed that there's a wealth of items out there that can be selected from. You can pick what you know is really meaningful to you, or even think about adding items. And maybe something occurred near that individual's departure, or you have a suspicion that they may have left due to a specific event. that is unique to them. So, maybe something with family. I don't want to speculate too much. Everything's different for everyone. But essentially, you may want to add another item in there just to make sure you're being inclusive of what they experience and learning as much as you can. Another helpful piece of this, again, that's new for pulsing and can be different from how kind of these haphazard, why are you leaving as you're on your way out the door, kind of throwing the questions out into the wind, is when you're looking from a bank or library of items like we saw in the example, is those can be HR approved or come from what you know is a validated survey measure. So you know that you're asking items that are going to get into that depth. They're going to really get those insights that you want. And then when you get the information back, you can say, what is the data telling us? And you know how items relate to each other to get a fuller picture that you can really rely on. You also talked about how you're using the data. So getting that individual feedback, if you get an email back that's really inflammatory from an employee right away, you can take action. You could raise that through the organization, take it to the person accountable for that information. Maybe an investigation needs to be developed. Maybe you need to go make sure that this isn't going to be an immediate problem and kind of trigger more turnover in the near term. So it's really important, again, to use pulsing for exit surveys if you can. It's a really great tool for that endeavor. Shifting a little bit now into the next piece of the agenda that we committed to is that critical timing and logistic decisions for your survey. We've talked about the why. Let's get a little bit into the how, really asking yourself, what do I need to quickly and easily execute this watertight pulse survey from an employee measurement program? I know I need insights. I know I need to solicit feedback. How do I make sure that that gets done in a responsible way? So from a world of options, how do you pick the right solution for you and make it work? Part of this conundrum is thinking about, we know pulsing is different from a census in that it's kind of a skinnier or lighter version, but do I need to pick items that are a sample of my larger set? Am I going to include, for example, core items in that? Maybe you're using an engagement index, for example, and you want to make sure you use those same items in any of your pulsing to make sure you have kind of this baseline or golden thread going throughout your measurement strategy. Or do you want to spend time more on dynamic items, so things that align with a specific initiative or kind of a trending topic in your employee population? Speaking of employee populations, are you asking these questions to everyone, or are you just going after a certain group, and do you need that group to be representative sample, or so you can generalize, or are you wanting to be more intentional or focused, making sure that this group was left out, or they're new, or they had a specific quality to them, maybe they were very high or very low, and we want to make sure we follow up with this selection of people. So really asking yourself what decisions make the most sense for us. No matter what you choose here to progress in your program, we'll talk about best practices for making those selections carefully. But whatever you do, you can expect that you're going to get more data more often. You're going to get targeted data, so you'll hear less of, I know I used to hear all the time, this doesn't apply to me, this was a point-in-time measure, I didn't get reports, this doesn't roll up to me, people disregarding essentially the feedback they're given because they don't think that it is relevant or speaking to them. Whereas with pulsing, we know, this is fresher information, this is targeted information, this is absolutely something to pay attention to. And then dashboarding results to get those in real time. Another quality of pulsing is that the information you're receiving isn't going to be stale or sitting on a shelf for a long time. This is something that can be brought to the front and raised quickly so that you can take action again, because that's the name of the game, is really taking action, building confidence with employees. To illustrate all of this, we're going to use an example for engagement. We've worked with a lot of clients who are thinking, we're working hard at engagement, we're doing as much as we can, maybe that's a great job, maybe that's treading water, but we're committed to it, but a yearly census seems like a lot of work, and it seems like we're not moving the needle as much as we'd like. So they're moving to a census, a large, rigorous measure maybe every other year, but using pulsing to still keep that regular flow of employee information coming in so that you can check and adjust your strategy, and you're not just, again, putting things on a shelf and continuing to let those voices become more and more out of date. Engagement is central to understanding the employee experience, but measuring it can often be weighty, and pulsing is attractive, therefore, because it provides almost the same value for less of an overhead investment. So Paul, tell us a little bit about how engagement can really be driven more powerfully through pulsing.
Absolutely, Brittany. Thank you. So the engagement of your employees is tied to most of your metrics, including customer satisfaction, revenue growth, a variety of financials. So it's important to keep your finger on the pulse, pun intended, where people are at in relation to their level of engagement. So for running a regular census survey, finding out what people are thinking in the interim can be very helpful to redirect your efforts. Companies often struggle with action planning as an overall process, and the last thing that you want to do is be action planning in the wrong direction based on your census survey, and a pulse can really help you see what those results are today or however often you pulse so that you can determine whether or not the things that you're doing are really hitting the mark. So for this type of application, it's important for the pulsing tool to also have some flexibility. As Brittany had said, you might want to be pulsing on core items, but you may want to pulse a small population on your entire survey. There's a variety of applications for that. You want to make sure also that your pulsing tool doesn't have limitations on the number of users or people that can go out and pulse, so that as many groups in your organization as want to pulse, ideally all of them, but you want to make sure that there's no limitations that keep people from being able to go out and get the data that they need. So the data that you get is really going to help understand what the pulse is at the given moment, and you can get that data in a couple of different ways, and good pulsing tools will give you two different ways to look at your information. Ideally, you want to be able to look at the dashboard for your survey. It's very helpful to be able to see what the results are as you're moving along through the process. So what we're looking at here is a dashboard that would give you real-time data as people are being asked to complete their surveys. It'll show you the percentage of participation for your pulse survey, the volume of comments that people are providing, which adds a ton of value for context in your pulse surveys. You can see at a glance where your top items and bottom items are so that you know where you're struggling and where people are doing particularly well. And a good dashboard also has some text analytics features. As we see here, there's a sentiment analysis off to the right to give you an idea of whether you're getting positive or negative comments in. And in the word cloud that we see here on the left, good tools will allow you to drill into the particular points that you're seeing. So if we click on company, it'll give us all the iterations of that root word, and will show us all the comments related to that. And you know, part of the pulsing experience is being able to collect data in real time, and reading the comments at the end is great, but being able to read them as they come in is a phenomenal help. So the dashboard can really be a key to getting you the data as quickly as you can possibly get it. Traditionally, there's reports that are tied to the pulse surveys as well, and good tools will give you a variety of looks at the data. In our case, we're not going to spend too much time here, but just to give you a good example, we have a PowerPoint report from a pulse survey that gives you, in the case of engagement, a pulse of what does engagement look like, some overall features of the data that you're getting in. As you see here, how engaged our employees are is indicated. And then depending on the complexity of your survey, it can contain additional categories, items, and things like that. So it also can contain strengths and opportunities reports that really a good pulsing tool will help interpret the data for you as well. So based on how your data came in, one of the benefits of the pulsing tools is to be able to be fed kind of where to focus your efforts without having to do a deep dive into the data yourself, saving you a lot of time. So there's a variety of standard pulsing reports that are available to you, but make sure that they're giving you good data in real time and that you're getting the depth and breadth of data that you need to make good decisions. Brittany, anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Paul. I think you brought a lot of good points to the surface, and the main takeaway for me is that, while you're asking maybe a lighter portion of your population or a lighter sample of your items, meaning you're not doing a full census, it's still important to make sure you get the insights from that exercise, because if people don't feel that the data is compelling, they don't think the feedback is really triggering some action, they're probably not going to take action, and that feeds into the cycle of, I'm an employee and I gave feedback, but I haven't seen anything from that, so I'm less likely to have confidence that my voice will be heard. I have less confidence that things will be done, and then your pulsing strategy can be really sunk from the get-go. So you want to make sure that while the administration methodology is there and helpful and fun even for users, that when you're getting the data back, that's also an engaging part of the process. Some of the other best practices you brought forward, selecting your methodology here, the platform that we find success with and other successful platforms that we're familiar with are simple enough that HR can use it or leaders can use it. So what we're looking at is something that's not as cumbersome as a census, doesn't need to be as patrolled or everything happening in cadence at the same time as a census. So you can really bring in people at different levels in the organization to launch these kind of surveys, to ask for feedback. When you think about kind of decentralizing that methodology, then consider survey timing. So you are aligning to initiatives. You may be asking things of groups in a timely manner. Maybe, like I said, there's a new group, there was a reorganization, you launched a new change, maybe new technology. But in all of this, make sure you're thinking about timing with the group. Best practice, we all know, if it's a heavy week for that team in particular and you give them a pulse survey to do on top of it, participation may be low and scores may be impacted in a negative way as well just because they're overworked. So be really considerate if you're going after a targeted population about your timing. The so what's you covered well also, making sure that it's all engaging. And you also always want to keep it accountability as the center focus. So bringing employees' voices to life and empowering managers to action plan in a way that includes that checking and adjusting for high rate of success. So you want them to be able to go back to that information, go back to that report or that dashboard so that they can make sure that what they're doing is really effective and that they can realign their strategy maybe before the end of the year or before what they're doing really drives into the ground and isn't impactful. So the final piece of our commitment to you today is, so what? So we have the why, we have the strategy. We want to make sure that this is something we can sustain. We want to make sure that this is now a holistic employee measurement survey program. So we need to make sure we know how is pulse feedback being collected, analyzed, and used. When pulsing, you need to respect the balance of asking for feedback and delivering on that investment. And again, that just helps develop that trust and confidence in that environment. So how do you enable empowerment and accountability when there's even more data out there? In the very first piece of this, we said you're getting more data more often. And when you hear that and you haven't done pulsing before, you may think, we have a census once a year and people can't even take action on that, on one point of data. And now we're asking for them to take multiple points of feedback, multiple data sets, and have some kind of coherent strategy for improving our talent management process, you know, whether that's your grassroots, your frontline leader trying to take multiple points of employee feedback, you know, multiple pulses throughout the year on different topics, or you're top of the house, you are a center of excellence running that engagement survey, and you want to make sure that you're, again, creating kind of that whole story. And I have a question coming through, question about exit survey confidentiality. Sure, so we'll be putting that into the Q&A at the end. I apologize for pausing there. I just want to make sure I'm addressing things in real time for clarity. So jumping back into this piece of what you can expect, we're going to talk about how you can integrate that feedback between surveys. That's going to be important not only for creating, as I mentioned, that holistic experience and kind of maintaining a seamless day-to-day for employees, but also for trending and all of the deep and rich insights that come from that. Getting faster results, meaning taking action more quickly as well. It's not a 6-week process for action planning and getting it approved and moving on now. Now you really need to own into what you committed to with employees, that kind of contract that you signed with them by asking for their feedback. And then talking about comparison data as well for greater perspective and more strategic solutions. So our example for this is going to be pretty unique. Something we are getting into and very excited about is that customer focus. So we may not have thought about using pulsing to get towards this, but we know that brand is more important than ever. We know that driving good customer experience is a huge differentiator. This can be a really valuable use of a pulsing platform or strategy that you intend to utilize. It's central for improving your winning attitude of your competition as well. Unfortunately, a lot of times customer focus is seen as something that can only be done or be attempted by certain parts of the organization. You may feel some parts of your employee base may feel too distant from customers, and it becomes a siloed activity. So we're going to discuss how you can use pulsing for this and how you can keep it open and inclusive to multiple parts of your organization. I think this is a really fun example of how pulsing can really stretch your strategy. Paul?
Great, thank you, Brittany. So in the example of taking action on customer feedback data, customer data is a great way to pulse and collect at the moment using some of the reporting tools that we looked at. Asking questions really implies action being taken as a result. So if we're collecting data, we want to make sure that we tie that in with some kind of action after the fact. And we'll take a look here briefly at what a good action planning pulsing tool may look like for you, as well as how do we get the right people involved. You need to be able to bring the right people to the table, as you may be pulsing your customers, and that data is valuable to you certainly, but it's important to think about who else might need to be involved to be able to see that data and maybe do something about it. So a good tool will give you the flexibility to be able to manage the users of your system so that you can determine if there's additional people that need to see your data or participate in your action planning process, that you can quickly and easily add people into your system. The system that we're looking at here allows for the flexibility to let people see only results or get into setting up their own survey and setting up action planning. So being able to quickly go in and add that information sends off, in this particular case, an email to a new user to be able to jump in, and at a moment's notice you can get other people involved in the pulsing process. So we're going to now take a look quickly at what does a good action planning process look like for pulsing as well, because if you're collecting data, whether it's on an engagement survey or a customer survey or exit survey, the implication is that something will be done with that information. And ideally, you would want your pulsing tool to have an action planning component that allows you to quickly, based on the survey that you're running, go into the system and create action plans to really drive the numbers up. In our case here, for the survey that we pre-created, you can select any of the items that you may want to action plan on. And it's important to put some parameters to your plan by having a good template. A lot of organizations tend to fail with pulsing in terms of getting anything done with the data afterward if they don't have a good tool to facilitate that. So figuring out what you're measuring, how you're going to measure it, and how you know when you're done is an important component to that. And a good tool will allow you the flexibility to track all of that, as well as provide, as you see here on the left, some best practices and key ideas and suggestions for maybe what you can do for the particular item that you're focusing in on. So again, the pulsing process is in part about collecting the data that you need, but an important component as well is after you collect the data, what do you do with it? How do you get that data out to other people so that the right people are seeing it, and how do you get the right people involved in the action planning process, as well as tracking your action planning from start to finish. So a good tool will, as you see, allow you the flexibility to do all of those things. Brittany, anything you would add?
Thanks, Paul. I think those are all really great pieces to consider when you're thinking about some of the more creative ways to use a pulsing platform. Some of the best practices you touched on were, leveraging the data from multiple teams and, really creating an action planning platform that aligns to, quick implementation, best practices, in the day-to-day, and rigor around, using that feedback. One thing I'd point out as well is what I've seen that I like in that usage is that it has the availability or the ability to invite a diverse team to take action. So what you're doing can be shared by sales and HR, for example, when you're talking about customer feedback. So we see that in these retail locations, our customers, have this and this feedback. That not only is a customer service thing, but maybe sales can be involved in that, HR can be involved in empowering employees to address those concerns. And so you take, something that is a business concern out of a silo and really broadening it to the organization so it becomes everybody's focus. I'll pause here for just a moment and address a question we had come in during the demonstration, which was, what did I mean by downtime or an off period? And that was back when I was talking about using pulsing for engagement, for example. And really that's getting at, if your organization wants to take a pause on a large census program, those large, more enterprise-wide initiatives for employee measurement, and just kind of keep working on action planning, pay attention to maybe other kind of fires that are going on in your organization, you may still want to hear employee voice. You want to keep up a cadence of soliciting feedback. And that's where pulsing comes in what would otherwise be an off period, or when you wouldn't otherwise be formally inviting that feedback and doing those exercises. So that's what I meant there, and I apologize for being less clear in the moment. Coming back to our present example, though, again, it's all about making sure you're getting these great insights and who's the best to be involved in the process. And the flexibility of pulsing really aligns itself to that. So you can get more creative solutions, more tailored solutions, and really empowering that cross-pollination of best practices, for example, between HR and sales, or even employees in different locations. Okay, at all retail locations, we're going to action plan on these top opportunities from the customer feedback. How are we going to get to do that? And so you get this cross-communication, which is really powerful. We have one more example of this, and I want to talk about onboarding, because it is a great way to think about trending and think about how we are bringing different times of measurement, different kind of time 1, time 2, time 3, or 60-day, 90-day, 6-month periods, or different pulsing, however you're looking at leveraging the time over time measurements of your measurement strategy. How are you bringing that together? What is it all about? Because we're all interested in those longitudinal or more long-term trends in our employees' experience. So Paul, can you tell us a little bit about onboarding as it's leveraged with the Pulse platform?
Thank you, Brittany. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Onboarding is another great opportunity to employ the Pulse methodology, in part because for the onboarding process, for the majority of companies that we have the privilege of doing this for, they're measuring at multiple points in time for new people, and you may be asking these new people a variety of different questions at each waypoint in their first 90 days or 120 days, however long you're measuring for your onboarding process. So the Pulse survey, as we looked at, a good tool will allow you the flexibility, again, of being able to select your content based on the timing and the population that you're sending your survey out to. But it's also important to be able to have flexibility in how you view that data as well. Static reports are helpful, but a good survey tool, if you're collecting multiple points of data across time, will help you to pull data together in a meaningful way so that you can see if there's trending information from one survey to another. In the case of onboarding, if you're measuring at 30, 60, 90 days, you would want to have a tool that allows you the flexibility to quickly go in and select the groups that you're interested in within your Pulse and be able to align the data in a way that you can see the trending across time. In this particular example of an onboarding survey, we just had 6 items that we were asking over a period of 3 different quarters. And you can see in this particular case, within a few clicks, we can have all of our item data stacked up against each other so that we can quickly see by item how the groups that we're measuring are trending over time. So there's a ton of valuable information there, as well as we need a tool for pulsing in all of the cases we've talked about today that really allows you to drill into demographic information as well, so that you can take a deeper dive into the data to understand what might be driving your pulsing scores. In addition to historical information, it's important to also be able to have a tool that provides you with aggregate data. So if you're running multiple pulsing surveys across time, you may want to aggregate all of those data points together collectively and see how that particular group or series or grouping of groups is doing over the entire time collectively. So again, it's all about having a tool that offers you these flexibilities to be able to look at your data in multiple ways and be able to look at your data across time. In this particular case, onboarding is a great example for that. Brittany, anything you would add?
The only thing I think is critical to realize here is that when you begin to look at trending, you move your personal needle, your personal ability to be predictive instead of just reactive. You can better tailor the employee experience now that you know what factors are leading to different outcomes. It's kind of like machine learning. You know, you're now that robot in The Incredibles, if you've ever seen that movie, where every time it encounters something, it incorporates that feedback and becomes more adaptable to its environment. So you're really getting more into a customized or more sensitive employee value proposition and being able to deliver on that. I want to share a little bit, as we're moving towards the close, just a summary of best practices for if you're considering including a pulsing survey into your existing program. Some of that can be, you know, easing into the pool. So thinking about limited release, and we're going to move to the next slide for this information. Perfect, thank you. So limited initial release, you need to make sure that people are comfortable using this platform, that employees understand but this is different from what they may be used to, and so resetting expectations of we're going to be asking you, different questions less often, or some people are going to be invited and others won't, just so people aren't wondering why there's a shift, and then living into that accountability. You want to make sure managers are ready to handle that information and launch those surveys, and that employees understand the new environment. and then also make sure that you have the tools and technology available to you to keep up that regular and rigorous cadence, however you choose to use that. Some of our clients have found really successful pulsing strategies. In this list here, we've talked about a lot of them at the bottom, pre-generated reporting so you can grab and go with that information right off the press. Categories, items that are good for reporting and having that best practice library. There's a lot in here. The top one that I don't think we got to talk about is this integrated action planning. We talked about collaboration in as far as you're inviting diverse people to be included in that process, but you could also just as easily, when we talked about creating that engagement strategy survey, creating a mini survey there and saying, 6 months ago we committed to action planning against these 3 items or these 3 topics. I want to know how that's going. A manager, for example, could launch a survey to their team and say, we sat down after the census, we decided we were going to work on this. How are we doing? Is this working? So you can take those unique questions or those one-off questions from your action planning, maybe pull in your engagement index as well, just to say, if scores have gone up in these 3 target items, scores should have also gone up in our engagement index. So you can kind of check yourself there and validate that your actions are taking root. We'll close in with just a quick check on some of the summary points, and again, this will be available as well. We talked about why do you pulse. It's about committing to a holistic strategy. It's about making sure you're getting the most and doing the most of your employee feedback to drive your business initiatives. Whom do you pulse? We talked about, you may want to think about a representative sample or a target group. You can think about what demographics need to be included, and it's really just the extent to which you're looking to customize your actions, or you really want to be generalizable, or use the information you collect from a sample population or a few of your employees out to the larger group, so you're getting kind of the same bang for lesser buck. How do you use pulsing for big results? You want to connect those employee voices. You want to get kind of a patched together picture of the full employee landscape. So make sure that you're looking at the different data that's coming in and putting it together. We talked about how do you pulse, who's going to be available for that, who's helping with administration. Moving to the next slide, we also have summary, or we talked about when to pulse, so thinking about timing and that regular cadence, or being more flexible with different initiatives. Also, how often should you pulse? When we talked about some of those different categories you can include and picking certain items, we all know that some things change day to day. Some things change week to week. Maybe a new initiative is taking root and you want to see how they're moving through the change curve or through that process from, readiness to adoption. Or you're thinking about something more long-term like, confidence in senior leadership. That's something that probably isn't going to change really quickly. So you want to be selective about what you pulse when. You probably don't want to pulse on senior leadership every week. That's probably not going to change a lot. It may just cause more frustration. So that gets into what data needs to be fresh versus more mature, and how are leaders held accountable. That's the name of the game, as I said earlier. You want to encourage them to use whatever platform you select. You want to encourage them to see the additional instances of employee feedback as a gift, to understand that that's a commitment employees are making to giving you their voices, with the confidence that they're going to do something with it. So every time an employee responds to your pulse surveys, it means they still have hope, they still have confidence, and they're still optimistic that their alignment with the organization is going to be mutually beneficial. So, that's really the moral of the story. Pulsing is just another way to bring your strategy and employees closer together and create a better experience for everyone that's more valuable overall. So that's all I have to share today. I think we have some time for questions. Thank you so much, Paul and Stanford, for walking us through that, and Scott for introducing this.
All right, wonderful. Looks like we have about 5 or 6 minutes for questions here, and we do have a few coming in. Please go ahead and ask your questions now, and we'll get it through as many as we can. Before we jump into that, I sent out a quick message through the chat. We are offering a free 60-day trial of the, there's a typo there, wonderful, free 60-day trial of our on-demand survey suite. It's free, and it gives you full access to all the tools you saw today. You can sign up. It takes about 60 seconds to sign up at www.ondemandsurveys.com. So go ahead and head over there. It's, again, being offered free to anybody that is at today's webinar. All right, let's jump into some of the questions. First, let's answer the one that came in about exit survey confidentiality. Which do we recommend? A confidential exit survey or an anonymous exit survey? Brittany or Paul, which of you want to take that one?
Certainly I can take the first stab at that one. For confidentiality's sake, there can be an argument made both ways. If you're looking to track data across time, it's important to be able to identify employees so that if you're looking for a deeper understanding of your data from a more holistic perspective from onboarding all the way to exit, it's important to not have it be anonymous so that you can tie particular data back to engagement scores or onboarding scores so that as you analyze the data more deeply, you're able to track those people over time. Not to go back to them specifically, obviously, because that's always the fear of not being anonymous, but really it provides a rich, deeper understanding if you go with confidential and not anonymous. Brittany, thoughts?
Thank you, Paul. I'd say there's I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think one thing to add in there, Paul, that we've seen with our clients is that to make sure to ask a few engagement questions on that exit survey as well. And that does allow you to, link that data across those surveys. And so if it's questions that they have seen before and that they're familiar with, it makes it a little bit easier to answer those. And from a reporting standpoint, it makes it easier to kind of have that golden thread across all of your data that you've collected.
Exactly. That's the core item, best practice we talked about a few minutes ago about making sure you have something that is continuous throughout your measurement strategy, something you can always go back to and say, we've asked this over and over again, not to be against a wall too hard, but to make sure that you're getting, something you can really point to and say this is trending a certain direction or not. And maybe you can say, we can see how they made the path to turning over ultimately, unfortunately. I'd say there is an opportunity for anonymous exit surveys as well. We know employees are more likely as they're exiting, the stakes are off the table, they can be really honest. And so it's nice if you feel that you can securely collect the data. You want to make sure wherever this information is living that it's safe and it's not going to be, out for the public to see, oh, what did John say on his way out? You need to make sure this is living somewhere where other employee data is also held securely. If you're going to ask it confidentially, Anonymity adds flexibility in that they can, you can have a generic link so you can be more flexible with how you invite people to take the exit surveys and just reinforcing that it can be honest. So we have another question.
We do, yeah. I think we got time for one or two more. Can you talk about benchmarking with respect to pulse surveys? Paul, will you take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Scott. So there's a couple of different ways to look at benchmarking. Obviously, it's good to know what you're comparing yourself against as opposed to it just being a random point in time. One way to look at benchmarking is to look backward to your census survey as your benchmark for the pulse if you're using in the terms of an engagement survey, or even a previous, for onboarding, you may want to benchmark against what the responses were before. But if history isn't the benchmark you're looking for, it's good to work with a company that has, as TNS does, a broad array of normative data points for your pulse surveys. So in our example, we can offer benchmarks for exit items, onboarding items, engagement items, and all of those types of things so that you can take a look at how you compare to other companies of your size or your type. If you happen to be manufacturing, things like that, we can get that granular to give you a specific benchmark so that you can see how you compare against other similar companies. Brittany, anything you would add?
I'd say I agree with you, Paul. I'd say also make sure if you're pulsing against a specific part of your population, so if you're just asking your distribution centers, you're just asking retail, but maybe you're a large organization that's very diverse, check and make sure that your benchmarks, as Paul said, you can get pretty granular, for example, manufacturing. Make sure that your benchmarks you're using are relevant for the population that you're asking questions for. Also make sure that if you're asking pulsing questions more frequently, especially if you're not kind of renewing your benchmarks through a census program as you would be otherwise, so maybe you're doing a census, or I'm sorry, a pulse instead of a census, that your benchmarks are up to date. So sometimes, companies will use their vendor for benchmarks that have been, redone every year or every few months. So make sure if you haven't done that for a while that your pulsing is using benchmarks that are fresh. You don't want anything stale. And with that, I think we are at time, so we'll go ahead and come to a close and say thank you so much for joining us today. Any outstanding questions we can address after the session, but I really want to thank HR.com for letting us share our insights and best practices and examples with everyone here today.
Well, thank you so much to our presenters from Kantar TNS for presenting this very informative webcast today. Just a few reminders for the attendees. If you would like to view this webcast again, the archive recording will be available on site for up to 7 days. The slides are also available for download. Your webcast credits are all stored in your HR.com account. Watch for your email to arrive within 1 to 2 business days. It will contain the certification credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment and fill out the exit survey that will appear on your screen. This concludes our webcast. Thank you again for joining us.